we do a monthly webinar series, and one of the things that we try and do is we align that webinar series with like key things that are happening in kind of the go-to-market calendar. And one of the big things that we know is happening, particularly in as we're prepping for next year, is a lot of people have done capacity plan work, so on and so forth, and then they've got this big sales kickoff RKO. We're intentionally calling it RKO. We'll get into reasons why. Scheduled for next year. I've sat in a lot of these. Patrick Allen, who I'm about to introduce, sat in a lot of these, and 9 times out of 10, they're not that great. So what we want everybody leaving here today with is how do you kind of deliver a world-class RKO so that the team is coming away aligned on goals, energized, all that type of good stuff. So we're going to actually get into specifics. You got questions? Like I said, much rather have this be conversational along the way. So, all right. We're going to give kind of a quick intro. So you just like, who are these random people talking to us? So you understand our experience. We're going to talk about the issues we normally see at RKOs. And then we're going to walk through kind of a step-by-step, hey, when we're talking about identifying goals, prep, executing, follow-up, what are some of the things you should think through? And then what is a checklist at the end? We really want this to be tactical. We generally hate being those consultants who like just deliver a bunch of slideware and it's like, hey, isn't this great theory? Aren't we super smart? We want it to be tactical so you can go and execute on it. Ted, welcome. Appreciate you joining us today. Ted, I was telling the others here, if you got questions along the way, let us know. Love to make this more conversational. We know everybody's probably prepping for an SKO, RKO, but we're going to get into kind of like specifics about how to do it well. So, all right. Without further ado, we've got another individual here. His name is Patrick Callan. We affectionately refer to him as PC. So you'll probably hear me say PC along the way. But he is the CEO and co-founder of Readier. PC, you want to give us an intro about who you are and a little bit about Readier?
Yeah. Thank you, Reese. I'm excited to be on the call and also agree. I actually like it that we've got a more intimate setting. It's going to allow for better, I think, richer conversations, which is going to be great. In a previous life, I actually worked with Reese and Alex. I've spent the last 10 plus years of my career in enablement and talent development within the SaaS space. And so having done that, I want to continue to work with high growth companies. And so I started Readier last May. And really what I'm all about is just enabling, your team with the expertise and operational rigor it needs to drive predictable revenue. And so delivering those fractional solutions within kind of the 3 areas that you see on the slide right there, program evaluation and development, sales efficiency and effectiveness, and talent development and organizational design. So really a builder at heart. And so I love working with companies, helping them think about and build out their enablement and talent development at their organizations.
And you want to give us 10 seconds on your fun fact here?
Yeah. So after 2 years in corporate America and being in a cubicle, I realized that sucked really, really bad. I didn't want to do that. I had a brother out in Colorado who was a raft guide and said, you should come out and do that. So I moved out to Colorado to be a whitewater raft guide, thinking I was going to do it for 1 summer. But then I met a girl who is now my wife and stayed here for 4 years. And I think probably the story of many Colorado transplants where you come out here for a little bit and then you just end up staying. So love it out here and can't see myself ever going back to Minnesota.
Favorite place you've rafted?
Oh man, that's a tough question.
We got 50 minutes, so we can't spend the whole time working on it.
Yeah, man, you're making me choose just one. I mean, Westwater's fun. Been down doing some rafting in Belize. That was a great time. Anytime I'm on the water is a good time.
Whoa!
I cannot beat yours, Michael. The Nile, no, that's a little bit longer than the Colorado. So.
Michael, I was about to give PC so much shit for the humble brag about like, I rafted in Belize, and like, man, Nile and Uganda. All right.
Yeah. We'll say little mic drop moment there. So
All right. Quick overview about Domestique. Domestique, we're a fractional revenue operations shop. When we talk about revenue operations, I'll get into the kind of methodology. We tend to think a little bit differently here. We have a team of 40, primarily work with B2B tech SaaS. We can do non-B2B, we can do non-tech, we can do non-SaaS. Anywhere from a couple million all the way up to pre-IPO, but we spend a ton of time in that, call it, 10 to 100 million range. Alex and I, we come from different backgrounds. He was a marketing ops individual. I was more a sales ops, RevOps. Started working together about 10 years ago. And, we have that healthy tension that we like. And we kind of talk about that through our whole org. I don't have a fun fact nearly as cool as Michael, you, or Patrick. Unfortunately, I had terrible decisions in hairstyle. And as you can see, my general dress style is in general. So, but yes, it was a bad decision. But Michael, what I doubled down on the bad decision, because I had it for 5 years. So it's one thing to have it, but then to double down on it for 5 years, it was a series of calamity bad decisions. So, all right. We like to start every session with a quick overview about what is RevOps, because we think this helps set the stage for the conversation we're going to have today. So when we think about RevOps, this is the connective tissue across your customer journey. When we run into a lot of other organizations who are talking about RevOps, they tend to think too narrow. So when we here at Domestique think about it, it's across truly that whole customer journey. So product, marketing, BDR, sales, CS, PS, support, all in alignment with finance. And then there's 5 work streams across that customer journey, and the order is important. So first is strategy. This is your go-to-market strategy. What's your ICP, an account-based revenue, account-based marketing shop? Are you using some sort of revenue methodology like a command and message, band, spiced? If your go-to-market strategy is not documented, it doesn't exist. Second is process. The process, this is the day-to-day stuff, right? Whether one individual is doing something or 20, they're all running the same process. BDR gets on the first phone call. What are the questions they're asking? Are those tied to a revenue methodology? How do they put them into the CRM? All of that stuff, again, it needs to be documented. Next is tooling. Tooling is not just your CRM, but your entire tech stack that touches the customer journey, and it should be set up based upon strategy and process. It should not dictate it. Fourth is data. Data comes out of your tech stack. 3 things about your data. 1, only measure what you can make a decision around. 2, it's got to fly at the right altitude. So executive conversation is 60,000 feet. A lot of us, probably more 6,000 feet. And 3, data has to be presented in such a way where the end consumer of the data, CEO, all of us, CSM, actually understands what the data is trying to say without RevOps having to explain it to them, and then can go make a decision around it. Last is enablement. Data highlights your hotspots in your customer journey, and you point enablement at it. Think of enablement in 3 buckets. 1 is skills, next is tools, 3rd is competition. And you may or may not be able to hear my teams going off in the background, so I apologize for that. So we're going to spend a lot of today talking about that kind of RKO, and that RKO is really in and around that kind of strategy and a little bit of that process. But we're going to layer in we're going to sprinkle in some data in there as well. So that's where we're going to spend a lot of our conversation today. We like baseline everybody because this is what dictates everything we do here at Domestique. And so we're going to now jump into this. Any questions about the RevOps framework before we actually get into RKO? All right. So we have intentionally been calling this an RKO, not an SKO. The reason why it's intentional is exactly to that last point on that last slide. I think one of the major mistakes that oftentimes is people only think, oh, sales are the only one who needs a kickoff, right? It's not the entire revenue team. So PC and I, we've sat in a lot of RKOs together. We've seen a lot of different types of problems. We've helped put together some. There are typically 5 problems that we normally see in any RKO. So people only want to be there, for the happy hours. It's like, hey, we're all going to go get drunk on the company's dime, 2, there's kind of a lack of alignment across not just the company, but the individual teams. Again, this is the difference between SKO, RKO. 3, there's limited participation. There's a lot of kind of talking at people, and people are just sitting there. They're on their phones, they're on Slack, whatever it is. 4, Or there's a lot of talk like, hey, we're going to do all these big grandiose ideas, but then there's little action, whether it's in the RKO or the follow-up afterwards. And then that follow-up afterwards, this is one of the number one things. So before we kind of jump into it, we wanted to kind of ask this group a question here of like, as you've kind of think about the RKOs that you've sat in, things that you've participated in, what is the one or two or three biggest areas that you've struggled in? I'm curious of those things that we listed out. This is the joint participation portion of today's webinar. Yeah, so thank you, Alex. Unclear goals, limited prep, poor execution, lack of follow-up. I like that, Michael. Ted, what about you? Oh, yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. PC, what's the one that you've seen, like you've put together these, you've sat in a bunch, like what's the number one thing you've seen, like if you had to stack rank these, what would you say?
Man, I think the top two, unclear goals and limited preparation, especially at companies, high growth companies. I mean, things are moving, you all know, things are moving 1,000,000 miles an hour, and you're trying to close out the quarter or the year, and the sales leader is the one who's developing and leading the SKO, and a million things on their plate, and so they just try to rush it, and you don't go into it with the design and focus that you really need to create an effective RKO, and you think you can wing it, and you can't, and it shows.
Cool. So we're going to talk about all these unrealistic metrics. Oh, Michael, thank you so much. Like, I'll Venmo you here in a minute, but you teed up literally the next section. So we're going to specifically dive into each one of these. And our goal, like I said at the beginning of this, is we want you coming out of this with specific takeaways of what you can go and do to make sure you have a good RKO. And I see somebody new joined us. I believe it's Gianna. And if I pronounce that incorrectly, I 100% apologize, but welcome. Excited for you to be here. Please ask questions. We'd love for you to kind of like engage along the way here. All right. Step one, identifying your goals. PC, what's interesting is like whenever we think about kind of like prepping for an RKO, right? We kind of think of it in two buckets, right? One is you gotta align first the kind of macro 60,000 foot view, the company's strategic initiatives, and then based upon that, we come down a layer or an altitude, and then start to align RKO goals, so on and so forth. When you've gone through this process in the past, PC, talk us through some of the key things you see, particularly in aligning the company's strategic initiatives, and then how those layer in to the RKO goals.
Yeah. So I don't know how many people on this call use obviously every corporation has annual objectives, whether you're using the OKR framework, what have you, but all roads lead back to corporate objectives. Everything that we do, obviously, right, drives to those corporate objectives, and having those clearly defined prior to going into that quarter. And as much as we'd like to have those goals, those company goals clearly defined early, I mean, how many times, Reese, have we been in a situation where the E team, the senior leadership, is still trying to nail down the next quarter's goals? So being able to have those clearly identified allows you as a sales leader to anchor to those as you're building out your subsequent quarter goals, right? That seems like stating the obvious, but being able to just lean on that bedrock of these are our very clear-cut goals. This is what we're driving to. It just makes it so much easier because you can reference those goals and the previous quarter's goals and actually use, if there's a delta, positive or negative, is kind of a nice way to justify, hey, this is why we're doing this thing right here.
And to this point, like I love where you're going with this, PC. Like to this point, this is part of the reason why in that kind of RevOps framework that we talked about, your go-to-market strategy has to be documented. So as you're working with your company leaders here on identifying this kind of macro stuff of OKRs. What is key change in strategy? When we talk about this, like, are you rolling out a promotion? Are you going into a new geo? Like, new product releases coming out. All of this stuff, once you understand the stuff, you need to document it. And then it's like, how does this then layer into the RKO? All right, PC, we've laid out the company goals. We've got them perfect world, right? Company actually did this on time, got this done November, early December. By the way, that never happens. Now we're laying out our RKO goals here. Walk us through, like, how do you align these RKO goals to these company initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I think what's really important is, it's easy to throw a number, in front of your team, but I always like to again anchor in that, where we all need to connect to the why. People need to know how they're contributing to the team, the department, the organizational success, right? People don't want to just be cogs. And so I always like to anchor into, here are our corporate objectives. And here is how we as a team are helping contribute to these objectives. If we want to hit this number, which in doing so will unlock all these other things that the organization now is enabled to do, we need to hit these numbers here. And then specifically go into, this is where we're at with the team, and this is how you all contribute to this. I just always go back to that to ensure I'm connecting to the why. So every single person in that room understands fundamentally, this is why I matter, and this is why my participation in this event matters.
And I think the interesting point you're hammering on here, PC, is that once you kind of have this direction or the North Star at the company level, you're then taking that a layer and drawing that thread throughout, right? So, like, oftentimes as we think about RKO goals, they're less about this kind of like, yes, there is a number, but the number is oftentimes the output, not the input. The
Right.
input's more about kind of like, hey, does the team understand the company goals? Are they aligned around not only the company, but then at the department level? How do we rally everybody so we're not just talking at them, getting them all energized? What are we doing to equip them, right? PC's an enablement like guru. Like, what are we doing? Is it certifications? Is it training? Is it role play? Like, what are we doing? And then how do people roll out of this feeling empowered?
Yeah. Because ultimately, I mean, right, with every RKO, you want people to buy in. Not that everybody needs to drink the Kool-Aid, but you need to have them engaged. You need to have them bought in. You need everybody to leave the RKO feeling pumped up and ready to just get the quarter started and rolling, right? Because how often do you just kind of stall and nothing really goes anywhere? And people are like, we talked a lot about it, about a lot of good stuff, but ops is still working on this, that, and the other thing. The other thing, just real quick, Reese, with respect to the goals, one of the problems that you encounter, right, at a high growth company is chasing shiny objects. And we do that as a company, and we do that as a department, we do that as a team. And I think everybody has been like victim to, oh, this is the leader's flavor of the month. And then they're going to forget about it. Being able to anchor into the goals allows you to have that focus and that intentionality around it, which I always found to be incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I 100% agree, because I think your point about clear understanding of the goals, how we're going to get there, and then feeling energized to go and do it. So, speaking of goals, one kind of like key takeaway here: if you have not done this yet, you need to go and do this yesterday. Building a capacity plan. Now, when we talk about a capacity plan here at Domestique, what we talk about is a all go-to-market, not just a sales capacity plan. So when I say all go-to-market, is truly marketing, BDR, sales, CS, the bottoms up. And a bottoms up is essentially, what have you done historically? So let's look at trailing 6 months, 12 months data. What have we done historically? And marrying that with the top down. The top down is board expectations. What do they want you to grow at? All that type of stuff, to see if there's a delta or not. What this should give you is this should give you essentially not only your resourcing plan for all of your teams, but sales, BDR, CS. It should also give you your key targets. And it's not just sales target, but it's pipeline targets. And really what you want to do in a good capacity plan is build the pipeline targets all the way up. So MQL, SAL, SQL. And marketing should come back to you based upon those targets and essentially say, this is my first quarter, first half of the year plan. These are all the channels that we're running. This is when we're going to run, and these are the targets that we actually expect to hit. Alex actually did this internally for us here at Domestique the other day. We have examples of capacity plans. I'm happy to kind of chat with anybody about a couple of just like gotchas that we normally see in capacity plans. One, if you're not doing the bottoms up, top down, I can tell you 99 times out of 100, there's typically a delta between those two. So how do you kind of marry what the board's expectations with what we've done historically? Two, if you're making key assumptions, i.e., hey, we're going to increase close win rate to try and close this gap, you need to identify the initiative that you're getting to that is going to help close that. Oh, we're going to run a certification program on how to multi-threat better, things like that. The reason why we're talking about capacity planning in alignment with the RKO is what the capacity plan is this is essentially your model or your Excel model of all of those company goals, then driven down by all the different teams, which is, again, why we're talking about an RKO, not an SKO. Michael, I see you just dropped a question there. How do you navigate the conversation when the dealer does not support the growth plan? Any idea of trying? Oh, so Michael, great question. We affectionately refer to it. So in capacity planning, we have two meetings that we affectionately refer to as the OSHIP meetings. The first OSHIP meeting is when you're building the capacity plan and you realize 99 times out of 100 that the bottoms up doesn't meet the top down. The second OSHIP meeting is the vastly worse one. That's 6, 7, 8, 9 months from now when people have done all the capacity plan, put it in Jordan, never looked at it again, and then pull it back out and realize they're going to miss the year. The best way to do this, do it early as you can. Second, the board your executive team, if for some reason you can't get the bottoms up to kind of meet the top down, the executive team needs to be willing to have the hard conversation with the board about, hey, look, those growth goals may not be achievable. The third thing is include all key stakeholders in here, right? Because there's a horse trading that goes on of like, this can't just be sales try harder. I love how you put that. It also needs to be, all right, hey, Alex, and Alex comes from the marketing world. That's why I like to pick on him. Alex, you need to kind of like do more with the same budget. What can you commit to with doing it? It's like, okay, I may reallocate this, and this here. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. BDR leader, what can you, so everybody is signing up for something and identifying the things that they're going to do to try harder, but you actually have some science behind the try harder, right? So this is the reason why I said you need to document the initiative you're doing. You're not just like playing fun with math in Excel. Hey, Michael, if you want to chat more about capacity planning, I could go on all day about this, but like we've got some examples of it. And by the way, anybody on here, we're always willing to kind of do a follow-up session. We're big believers in kind of paying it forward and doing sounding board sessions and things like that. But like, if you haven't done a capacity plan, you need to do it. It essentially takes your company goals, puts them in a model, and helps you kind of align on those goals. Because exactly what PC was talking about, you want everybody aligned around what are the goals we're driving at, not only for the year, but the quarter. All right. So that's aligning the goals. What other thoughts, comments, questions do people have? Otherwise, we're going to jump into prep. Great questions. I love them. I'm intentionally moving quick because we got 33 minutes. I want to make sure we get through everything. All right. Built out the goals. So you got company strategy documented. You've then identified the goals for the RKO. You have your capacity plan built. All right. What do you need to do to now set this up? Most of you will probably have an RKO plan second, third, fourth week of January. What are you doing between now and then to be able to kind of like set this up? PC, you and I used to do this on a regular basis. We do a previous year retro. Why do we do this? What are we looking for? Talk us through some previous year retro.
Yeah. So there's nothing that I hate more than the ready, fire, aim approach. I think we're all familiar with that. Probably should have done a trigger warning, but there's nothing worse than rushing in and solving a problem only to find out you're solving the wrong problem, right? And so to know where you're going, you need to know where you're at right now. And everything I do from an enablement standpoint, and this is where, Reese and I were, left brain, right brain, is really backed by data and in some ways driven by data, because everybody's time is incredibly valuable. And Michael, if you want to go, back to your point about getting buy-in, if you've got data to support what you're doing, you're able to say, like, we're not doing this just for the sake of doing it, to hear ourselves talk. We're doing it because what we found in the retro. And so what I like to do is go back and look at all the previous quarter, previous years performance data, sales velocity, quota attainment, et cetera, et cetera. I like to then benchmark that against the company goals, whether they're the previous years, and then thinking about what we need to achieve next year, right? One of the things that we need to achieve that's absolutely critical is we need 80% of our reps hitting 75% of quota. I want to see where we're at against that goal. The close won, close lost reviews, we would dive into that, because you want some of the qualitative data to inform, okay, why are we losing? How can this support the hypothesis that we have? So we'd run a close. Yeah.
And where we're losing, right? Not just the why.
Yep.
Is this a middle of funnel, top of funnel, bottom of
Yeah, exactly. And, because ultimately it's all about getting to the root cause. And Michael, your question, what I loved about your question is we've had to navigate those conversations, and we need to come armed with a true understanding of the root cause that's driving that gap in performance that's clearly not supported by the historical data. And oftentimes it allows you to peel back and go, hey, we've got a rigor problem. We've got these processes, but nobody's following it, nobody's inspecting it, or we don't have things documented. So what's also great about these retros is they can illuminate gaps in your ops processes or your CRM documentation. You go to try to do a win-loss review only to find out that that's not a field in your CRM and nobody's documenting it.
So a couple other takeaways here. And again, not trying to cut you off, PC.
Yeah.
Cognizant of time. Sup, Lance? Great to see you. Thanks for joining. Feel free to jump in with questions. A couple of things that we love to run data on. Sales velocity. If you're not familiar with it, we'll drop a blog into the chat. It's essentially number of ops times ASPs times conversion rate divided by sales cycle. It gives you bookings per day, but what it really does is it gives you the 4 key components into pipeline efficiency. And to PC's point, you can start to understand what's not working and where. Oh, hey, the enterprise team may have hit quota. And by the way, quota team is a dumb metric. Like they may have clipped one big deal, but oh, wow. Their conversion rate's 13%. So that, 13% is like an 8x coverage. Like, do they actually have that? What can we do about that? Oh, PC ran the close loss review. The enterprise team is losing everything in stage 3 and stage 4. Are we multi-threading? Do we understand the paper product? You can start to get into those conversations. Second key takeaway, these surveys that you can run is like gold. Just straight up ask team members, whether it's enablement, hey, where could you use more help? What did you like? What didn't you not like? The other good one, if you never do it, we do it on an annual basis. We recommend with our clients, run a comp survey. Like, did this spiff, drive the needle, so on and so forth. The amount of comp surveys I've run to essentially, you think you're being all smart, like, oh, this is going to drive all this alignment across the team. People yeah, that didn't move the needle at all. So sales velocity, run the surveys. Alex is going to drop in the sales velocity equation in there if you got more questions around that.
Hey, Reese, can I add one more thing just about the retros?
Yes.
So everything is sunshine and roses when you hit your number, and RKOs are incredibly positive. When you don't hit your number, kind of the tenor of the RKO it can be vastly different. And we know, it's very hard to not get into the blame game, especially when you're talking about marketing and sales and demand gen, et cetera, et cetera. Going through a comprehensive retro gives you the quantitative, objective data that allows you to avoid having an RKO turning into Reese didn't do this, Alex didn't do that. You've got a clear understanding of why things didn't turn out the way that you needed them to turn out.
Could not agree with you more, because sometimes when you win, there may be some underlying problems that you don't realize. So one of the big things in order to run a good RKO is there's oftentimes stuff you need to present, roll out, have ready for the RKO. This is a list of a lot of just like traditional stuff that oftentimes happens this time of year. If you haven't done this, one of the things that can lead to kind of like the most kind of lack of buy-in, not great success for RKOs, is if the prep work hasn't been done. So let's say you're rolling out new territories and no one's done the updated ICP analysis, done the account grading inside of your CRM, built out the territories, and they're not ready to go live the day of the RKO. That then discredits your RKO. So as you think about those RKO goals, right, again, what are the goals that we're trying to get out of it? What are the things that we're trying to do to enable and empower the team? What's the prep work you need to have done? This time of year is typically one of the busiest for RevOps professionals because they're working through a number of these types of things. So I would work backwards as you think about your RKO goals. What are the 1, 2, 3, or 4 things that are going to be hugely helpful to have ready at the RKO so you can just hit go live when everybody shows up on that Monday, the 17th, or whatever your RKO is. PC, as you think about initiatives from an enablement perspective, I know we're getting into that on the next slide.
Yeah.
Or what are some of the things you always thought about as you prepped for RKO from an enablement perspective?
Man, I really wish I had enough time to put together a comprehensive, well thought out plan that I can deliver to the reps during the RKO. So it looks like Rev leadership has their stuff together. And I think that's all about, right, the prep and thinking about, what do we need to accomplish? What do we need to roll out? What infrastructure do we need to get in place so we can then build out the training plan? Because nothing helps you build that credibility than if you can come to the conversation with that well thought out designed plan. The other thing that I like to do too, that we've done in the past, that Michael, to get back to your point again about buy-in, is bringing in kind of key advocates and allies, individual contributors, to help inform what some of this may look like. So I have buy-in already kind of preceded at the RKO.
I could not agree with you more, PC. I think making sure you've got everything ready to go and that there's key buy-in. Michael, yes, great question about comp. A couple of big believers, things we're big believers in comp. One, don't fuck with comp. And I seriously say it like that. And what I mean by that is you want to make comp easy to understand, drive the right behavior, and then when people achieve it or things like that, you pay it on time, things like that. I think a lot of sales leaders try and get too cute, too fancy. Oh, we're going to do 30% for close one, 20% for pipeline. Make this stuff easy to understand and aligns to those company goals that we're trying to do. The best in class comp plans are simple and they're driving at the same goals and they're all aligned. So one of the big things on comp is the marketing leaders comp and the marketing teams comp should be the same set of goals as the sales team comp, as the BDR comp. This should all come from your capacity plan. So as you build this out, marketing leaders should have a close one number that they're running at too, right? They also need to have a marketing source pipe. BDRs, they need to have everybody needs to be running in the same direction, which is why we're intentionally being company goals, build out in your capacity plan. And then this is an RKO, not an SKO. All right, PC, do's and don'ts.
Yeah.
Do's and don'ts for, what are your top 2 or 3 do's and don'ts? Michael, I'll answer that in 2 seconds. Go ahead, PC.
Yeah, if you remember one thing from this slide and one thing only, just remember less is more. I think is a big one. And the other is you just have to start planning the RKO early. At least a month, perfect world, in advance. And you want to have a team who can do it, right? I mean, ideally, you have an RKO owner who is working with senior sales leadership to help develop out the agenda and what everything looks like. So just don't wait until the last minute. Don't think you can wing it. Don't try to do it in a vacuum, because then that seems like this is what I think the agenda should be. Then you're not getting, it's not going to be a good agenda. It's not going to bring other people into the conversation, and just make it very, very focused. Where we've gotten in the most trouble in the past is when we like stack this agenda with a million different things, and the agenda has to be perfectly on time. And as a result, everybody just tunes out. And so less is more.
100% agree with you. Michael, great question about comp. Just circling back on it. The early thing is so hard. I've seen so many sales leaders try this 1,000 different ways. I actually generally think you can try accelerators and so on and so forth. I actually think the number one thing that actually drives successful sales has nothing to do with comp, but actually has everything to do with your operating cadence. And your operating cadence, when we talk about it, that's your meeting structure. And what is the meeting structure? One of the things we recommend, and this really should be kind of in RevOps initiatives that you do prior to everything that you roll out at RKO, is update your quarterly operating cadence. So it's who's in the meeting, what is the objective of the meeting, was there any prep or reports required in the meeting? So being super intentional about that. And when I talk about operating cadence and this, you want to have a delineation where I think a lot of sales leaders get it wrong is they have a one-on-one, and the one-on-one is forecasting, pipeline management, professional development. You need to separate all those out. There's a weekly one-on-one with the sales leader in the AE pipeline review. There's a group sales forecasting call, and then there's a once a month or whatever the frequency is, professional development. But then in the pipeline review, you're driving home, hey, do we have the economic buyer here? Where are we in the paper press? The teams that I've seen do that the best tend to drive less of the hockey stick. The problem is comp, human nature. Like you get one or two of the reps who will like do things early, but like it only does so much, which again, that was my comment about the comp survey. If you're doing multipliers, ask people about it, but like more times than not, like I've not seen that drive early success. So proof of that, happy to chat more about that. Great question. All right. We've got our goals, right? Company strategy. We've then kind of aligned what are the RKO goals. We've built out the capacity plan, done all the prep work. We've built out, all right, we've done ICP analysis, updated account grading, built out territories. PC's got this retro that he's done this close loss analysis. We're losing things at like stage 3. So he's working on a multi-threading / paper process certification. Now we got to go have our RKO. What do we need to do to make sure we have a world-class RKO? PC, you and I have talked about this several times. It's all about the agenda. Talk to, what is it about the agenda, and what are some of the things we need to make sure that like you want to have include and not include in the agenda?
Yeah. It's all about the agenda. So this it made me think, Reese, back about, the prep. And one of the things that, you want to make your RKO repeatable and scalable. And so I'm always a huge fan of building out a playbook or a process template around how I prep, and so when it comes to the agenda, less is obviously more. You want to make it focused, but you also want to make it consistent. So I'll always include like, what are the sacred cow elements that are going to happen at every RKO? I know, and we'll talk about this on the next slide, I believe, when we talk about, the specific agenda. But when I know that I've got these key foundational elements that are in everything, that makes it so much easier to focus and come up with like this narrative theme that ties every element of the agenda together. So it doesn't seem all discombobulated. Anchoring in the goals, the thing, making it relevant and continuing to connect to the why. Who is attending that solution or session? And this is the important one that I don't think people do enough, which is, how does the content apply to everybody in the session? And I try to do that with any presentation that I'm doing outside of an RKO, because you want to get that engagement. And so I'm thinking about that as I'm building out the agenda. And then, of course, who is presenting? Am I going to tune out? Do you have a nice mix of workshops and presentations? And then what are the action items? What are the tangible actions that people can take or leave with? So, like Teresa's earlier point, you're not just spouting off a bunch of theory, you're equipping them with the materials they need to execute on everything that we were talking about.
Could not agree more. Like, you take one thing away from the slide: focus, relevant, engaging, actionable.
Yeah.
Like, it is right. So what we've done here is PC and I have built out a lot of RKO agendas. This is an example. This is a 2-day version. You need to figure out what's the time frame. Is it a 2 days, a 3 days, a 4 day? Seeing all variations of it. But you can see here there are multiple altitudes, right? You start with the State of the Union. This is the company goals, so on and so forth. State of the state, that's more kind of department revenue specific. So multiple altitudes. There's a bunch of cross-functional stuff in here. So you got updates from marketing. Then you've got different modes or channels of how the works or how the sessions are being delivered. So some are presentations, some are workshops, and then you've got some like team building and fun here. PC, like, what are your one or two kind of like tips and tricks as you're building out like an agenda?
Yeah, I think one of the big things is don't make the mistake of thinking an agenda you put together for an in-person RKO will be effective for a virtual RKO. Virtual RKOs, I mean, we've all probably been a part of them, can actually be more mentally and physically exhausting than an in-person RKO.
I feel like every day in all my meetings, I'm sitting in a virtual RKO. It's just, back to meetings.
Yeah, and it's really tough. And so, knowing, is it going to be virtual or is it going to be in person? How do I need to adjust my agenda and the length of the RKO accordingly? This is a 2-day agenda. I think the big thing is know your organization. Don't feel like it has to be a 2-day RKO. If you guys can knock out an RKO in a half day, do it in a half day. If you need 2 days, if you need 1 day, I think that's the big thing. But having that nice blend of workshops, because the secret sauce with an RKO is really you're bringing these people together, which is a rare opportunity, and they learn from each other and build in those moments of shared learning. That just really starts to make the RKO sing. In my opinion, ties into the do's and don'ts.
Could not agree more. So do's and don'ts for the actual execution of it. PC, what are your top 1 or 2 on the do's and the don'ts side?
Yeah, the budget 20 to 30% more time than you think you need is a huge one.
Yeah.
I've never seen a session end on time. In fact, I've seen multiple times where sessions get cut. Being mindful of what sessions go where, what you have before lunch versus what you have after lunch.
These types of things, just one note there, that sounds so small, but has such a big impact because people's attention wane throughout the day. So being thoughtful, like, hey, is this the most engaging time? And we need people. If so, right before or after lunch, probably not the best spot to put it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that ties into the being audible ready. Know when to let a conversation breathe, read your audience, know when to say, hey, gang, we're tuning out. Why don't we go ahead and end this one a little early? And know, identify what are the sessions that, if need be, I could push out into a lunch and learn. And just go with the flow. There, I think, are the big ones.
I have one that I will call out. Like, this is like, PC and I have put together a lot of these in our day. Do not fuck up. The amount of like feedback that we get on food and drinks, and like, look, you don't have to have the perfect thing for everybody. It's like, you need to make sure there's enough food. It generally shows up on time, and like people like, get fed and so on and so forth. So like, you will get a lot of feedback there. So just make sure people are, happy, healthy, and full stomachs. So
Yeah.
Anything else you'd add in here, PC?
No, not that hasn't already been listed.
Cool. All right. So we've talked about the goals, we've got our company goals line, we've prepped for it, we had all those RevOps initiatives, the enablement initiatives, prep and ready to go. We get to the SKO, go live on those initiatives. We execute a world-class, I'm sorry, I said SKO, I meant RKO. We'll execute a world-class RKO. This step 4, this is the number one thing people screw up whenever they're running RKO. It's the follow-up and follow-through. And what this does is this discredits a lot of the work that you've done if you don't do this well. So the follow-up is equally as important as the prep and the execution. So just like there were a bunch of RevOps initiatives that had to happen going into the RKO, there's 9 times out of 10, a ton of RevOps initiatives coming out of an RKO. These are an example of a number of things that typically come out of it, or things that, we've talked about. I will highlight just a couple of, so if you're in the RKO, and one of the things that comes out of it is, you have path of plan, and path plan, this is normally a session where a bunch of salespeople stand up. They have like, hey, look, this is my quota for the next quarter. This is what I did well last quarter. This is what I didn't do well. This is how I'm getting to it. These are some of the things I'm going to do different. Oftentimes coming out of those sessions, there'll be asks or like, hey, look, I'd like to understand this better, or, what can I do better in terms of working with my BDR? Things like that. This is where some of those RevOps initiatives will come in. One of the things that I would strongly recommend, so we talked about capacity plan earlier. If you're not doing demand council is a weekly cross-functional meeting. We describe it as a process, but it's heads of marketing, heads of sales, head of BDR, heads of CS. You take your targets from your capacity plan. So, hey, your MQL, SAL, SQL targets by each of the different kind of like segments and pipeline sources. And you look and see how you're doing week over week. And essentially what it allows you to do is essentially say, are we on track or are we off track? If we're off track, is it a demand, a conversion rate, or an ASP issue? And where is it showing up? Okay, it's in our enterprise team marketing source. What this will allow you to do is to be able to identify hotspots and take action against it so that you're able to kind of like address this moving forward. What it does is drives cross-functional communication across the team and make sure you drive more consistent pipeline. So this is a classic initiative that comes out of a lot of RKOs. And if you're not doing it, I strongly recommend doing this because this will drive more of that cross-functional alignment and make sure you have more pipeline coming in your next quarterly. PC, I know we're going to talk about enablement initiatives. What are some of the classic enablement initiatives coming out of your RKOs?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is just the ongoing training and the support of, if you're rolling out a sales methodology, there's the training around that. If you've created a playbook, it's operationalizing that. So I think it's is it a training or certification? Is it going to be something process oriented where you need a playbook? Is there, the content side of the enablement that, you're rolling out a product update, you're working with product marketing to have this supporting documentation? You're thinking about what does the team need and how do they need it delivered? And you're planning that in advance. So I'm ready to roll with it as soon as the RKO is over. And I'm actually presenting in the RKO, here is the enablement plan for this specific initiative. Here's what's going to happen. So on the right, that little screenshot that I have there, things that I've done in the past when rolling out an updated discovery framework. One, we would have to make sure that we have a discovery question library ready for the team. We would do intro call certification. So I would present the team. This is how that certification process is going to work. And then we know that this is ongoing. So we're going to have bi-weekly lunch and learns. And we're going to be rolling out call scorecards in our conversational AI tool. Because what's critical is that ongoing inspection and adoption.
And I think PC's last point there is this is one of the most important things, right? And so we're trying to keep our RKOs simple, right? Along a couple of key themes. And you're trying to empower the team. And if one of the things you've said, right, to use this latest example is like, hey, look, we need to make sure that we've got top of the funnel, like we're driving better conversion. All right, we're rolling out this discovery core card. This is going to help drive that inspection and adoption. So speaking of adoption, here's an adoption plan. You want to walk us through this, PC?
Yeah, I mean, right. I mean, what you need to measure how things are going with the program, how effective it is, but what do you measure it against? And so one of the things that I've done in the past that was really, really helpful was developing AE competency frameworks. And competency frameworks are living and breathing depending on what you need your AEs to be doing. But I want to have a standardized benchmark by which that I am measuring performance. And so I would measure that against a competency framework. Go ahead, Reese.
And what this is going to do is it's going to, one, help your team feel like they're being empowered, and two, drive more credibility in all the things you talked about during your RKO.
Yep.
We're moving quick because we've got a couple of slides left and want to give a minute or two for Q&A. So RKO follow-up. You've had a great RKO. You're working on the follow-up. You rolled out the discovery process and you got an adoption plan. PC, what are your top one or two do's and don'ts?
I think the absolute top is commit to delivering and inspecting the initiatives post RKO. This is critical for adoption, and it prevents the team from viewing the initiatives as just another flavor of the month. You do that one too many times, and people will begin tuning out the initiatives because they know that sales leadership isn't going to inspect, isn't going to hold them accountable. So why should I do it? And so you have to be able to commit to holding people accountable to the initiative, to the process, et cetera, et cetera.
And as a part of that, in order to set yourself up for success, don't overcommit, right? Hey, these are 2 or 3 things we're going to do. This is how we're going to track it. And the team is going to feel empowered. And then you can start to drive themes through not only your RKO, but then your subsequent QBRs.
Mm-hmm.
All right. If you take one thing away from today's webinar, what we're trying to do is give you the high-level checklist of the things you need to do. These are all the kind of key things we talked about. So you want to take this slide and kind of run with it. So we talked about establishing company strategies, one of the initiatives. You want to build that into a capacity plan and understand how do those goals drive down at the department, the team, and the individual level. From a prep standpoint, hey, there's not only the logistics about meals, rooms, virtual, in-person, so on and so forth, but what are the RevOps initiatives? What are the enablement initiatives that need to be live when you get into the RKO? That creates the credibility for what you're doing in the RKO. When you get into the execution, PC hammered up home on this, and I think the point is 100% spot on. Allow yourself to be audible ready, so you can kind of work within things. If you give yourself flexibility in the agenda, it's going to make things a lot easier. And we talked about the food and drinks. I know that sounds simple, but I promise you it'll go a long ways. And the follow-up, don't overcommit, and pick the 2 or 3 things that you're going to follow up on with enablement, RevOps, and inspect, measure, and follow up. All right. That is our conversation today about RKO. Really appreciate everybody taking the time. Brandon, Ted, Aaron, any thoughts, comments, questions?